In this module, you're going to create a template for writing a brief, and it's going to be perfect. It's going to have a cover page, it's going to have a table of contents, and it's going to have a section for you to actually compose your brief with proper headings, page numbers, and all the features that a court requires. It's going to take a little while to get through all this material. Be sure to use the pause button and stop and follow along so that you can do all of these steps. I've started a new document and pasted in the standard civil cover sheet provided by LRW. You can see that there's no page number on the cover sheet, and there shouldn't be. There's this curious thing called a section break. I want to show you how to put one of these in. You use the Insert menu, Break, and then Section Break, not Page Break, Section Break for next page. That's going to do something important, actually critical to the design of this document. I'm going to put in some placeholder text for our table of contents. And then I'm going to add another section break. And at this point, this page will actually have our brief, and we'll put our placeholder text here. I'll just paste that in. Now we have a 3-page document. I want to start by showing you how the headers work. Notice here that when we click in the header area, we get this special blue outline. We get the first page header, section 1, the first page footer, section 1, and then first page header, section 2. What this means is the section 2 header, the page 2 header in our case, is actually linked to the first page. So we want to sever this link. Go on up to the header and footer ribbon and deselect link to previous. This is going to give us a different header on our page 2. Notice that the same as previous is now gone. When we go down to the footer, we'll see that we also have to sever the link by deselecting link to previous. Now we have a section 2 footer. Now our section 3 footer is linked to our section 2 footer, so we have to undo that link as well. So we click link to previous, that will deselect it, and we have to do it with the section 3 footer as well. So our brief is going to have 3 sections, and on these different sections there will be different footers. On the table of contents page, let's put in our page numbers. We want page numbers to be in the center, and we want to format them with little Roman numerals. That's what a table of contents typically gets. Press OK here, and OK one more time, and now we have the little I on the table of contents page. But if you scroll down or up, you'll see that there's no page number on the cover page, and there still are no page numbers on the brief placeholder page. That's because they have a different footer that is no longer linked. So we're going to go to Insert, Page Numbers, and we're going to put in a centered page number, this time starting at 1, not counting from the previous section, and we're going to use the format 1, 2, 3, of course. Now, all our brief text will get standard whole numbering that will be different than the table of contents, and none of it will affect the cover page. Let's begin the creation of our brief template by modifying the normal style. The advantage of modifying the normal style is that it will change most of the fonts in the document. So I've made it Times New Roman, 12 point. We're going to make it double spaced. Once we've done all these things, we'll have modified much of the document. And from here, even though we could use normal as our brief text, I want to create a new style for body text that's a little bit more custom. So we can open up the Styles pane, select New Style. We'll call this style Brief Body Text. We'll make it based on normal. Most of these settings are correct. We'll come back a little bit later and tweak them a bit. Let's also make a new style for a block quote. And of course, a lot of this is review, but it's good to do it again. Here we'll call it brief block quote. We'll make it based on brief body text, and the style for a following paragraph will be body text. This text should be justified, it should be single-spaced. And remember, we want to indent our block quotes. So there we go. And when we get this back into focus here and apply block quote, we can see that looks pretty good. It looks good on the top, not enough space on the bottom. We need to fix that so that we can go back into our block quote, modify the style, go to paragraph, and then what we're going to do is we're going to add 12 points of spacing after. We're also going to select do not add space between paragraphs of the same style. That way, block quotes will be nice and tightly packed together. Now that we have our body text set up and our block quote set up, we can work on the headings. Now this is a bit tricky. It's a bit of work. So remember that you can press the space bar to pause the recording at any time and go back to Microsoft Word and come back to the video. Also make sure that your environment is nicely set up. It's useful to have the Styles pane open. You can get to that through the Home ribbon by clicking on this button, Styles pane. I've started out by creating 4 dummy texts here. I'm going to click here and I'm going to apply heading 1 to heading 1. So far in these videos, I've been highlighting text and then doing the application of a style. You don't actually need to do that. You can click anywhere in the text and then go to the heading and it will format it. So we have our heading 1 here and it's not proper yet, but we can begin to make it proper. We've formatted it with heading 1 so far. Now, if we go up into the Home ribbon, you can see that there's this option for multi-level lists. If you click on this, you'll see that among the options are a multi-level list that gives you a heading 1 started with big I, then big A, and then a 1. And then following each one of these outline elements are a heading, heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. If you click that, something interesting happens. Notice how the headings over here all become indented and outline numbered. So we're going to use that as a basis for our brief. But we still have some work to do to make sure that it works properly. And some of it is a little tricky. So let's start with heading 1. We're going to modify the style. There's a lot we need to do here. Let's make the style for the following paragraph brief body text so that you can go right into your writing rather than clicking a style later when you use this. We need to turn this to Times New Roman. We also know that it should be 12 point. It should be bold. There should be no color. We'll just turn it to automatic and that will turn it black. Heading 1s in Legal Brief are actually centered. So we'll do that. I like to single space my headers. And then now that we've done all of this, let's go into paragraph, and there's some tricky things we need to do here. One of the tricky things we need to do is to create a hanging indent. We do this because if you go to Special and select Hanging, and then reduce this to about 0.2 of an inch, this will cause long headings to be nicely tabbed together. You'll see what I mean when I show you the final product here. We should also add a little bit of spacing, probably 12 points, so that text after this heading isn't mushed together. So let's see. That's looking reasonable. Okay, so let's go to our heading 2. We're going to have to basically do all the same steps. We might be able to save some space by linking our style to heading 1, but that didn't work. You see it's still using Calibri. Well, the style for our following Paragraph should be brief body text. We're going to do Times New Roman. We're going to do 12 point. We're going to do bold, automatic. We'll make it black. It should be left justified rather than centered. It's single spaced. Now when we go into paragraph, notice that our heading 2 is indented a great deal. We actually don't need to indent it because heading 1 is centered. So we should get rid of this indentation so that it looks nicer on the page. We also need to do hanging indentation. I would like to make this 2 or 3/10 to make it pretty. So there we go, that's heading 2. Heading 3 involves much of the same work. We're going to make it based on heading 2, just so it's linked. Brief body text. Again, Microsoft Word is now married to Calibri, so you constantly have to remove it. We'll turn it black, it's left, single spaced. Then let's go into paragraph here. Let's reduce this indentation to 1/2 inch. And let's add hanging indentation by just 2/10 inch. There we go. And then we do the same thing for heading 4. So we still need to do Times New Roman here. Got to deselect italics, make it black. Check here in the paragraph. Let's reduce the indentation to 1 inch and then hanging 2/10 inch. Okay, this should be looking pretty good. Now at this point, you probably only need 4 levels of hanging for your brief, but if you want to go on and do heading 5 and so on, you can do the same steps. And we can also check our work. Here we have brief body text. What I'll do is I'll just copy some of this stuff and I'll put it between, and that's looking pretty good, right? We have nice space between the heading and the bottom, and all 4 of them are looking nice. One optimization we might want to do here is go back to brief body text. We could modify the style here, and then we could make a first line hanging indentation. This helps you see new paragraphs. So if we do this, you can see that new paragraphs are very easy to see. I put dummy text into the document, and I was going back, checking over my work, and I realized that several steps have actually broken the document. So for instance, the cover sheet has become double-spaced. And of course this makes sense. When we changed the normal style, we made all the text in the document double-spaced. So to fix this, we need to create a new style for elements like this address block. That's simple enough. We know how to do that. I've created one. I've called it lawyer info block, and it's basically just single-spaced. We can apply that same style here, and that cleans up our cover sheet. It's looking good now. Let me show you a couple things about the document now. Another error that I noticed was that I didn't make my heading 1s all caps. Heading 1s are supposed to be all caps, and there's actually something you can do to make sure that they're always all caps. If you go into the style, modify the style, and select the font menu, one of the options is all caps. If you select this option, everything you type in, no matter what case you use, will be in all caps. That makes your headings idiot-proof. And so that's a good thing for me. So there are my all caps headings. Going through the document, let me show you 2 other elements that are important. You remember that I emphasized the importance of creating a hanging line indent. That's to deal with problems like this. When you have a really long heading that's a whole sentence long, and then it goes past a page margin. By using the hanging margin, the entire sentence becomes properly aligned with the tab. If you don't use that hanging indent, the language starts over here. So this is why it was so important to go into this heading, each one of these headings, and adjust them under paragraph so that there's a hanging indent. Without that, it doesn't look as good. And then finally, we'll go down and I'll show you one last point. Because we modified the normal style, all the elements in the document should be in Times New Roman. And I've put in a footnote here to cite to our dummy text, and sure enough, our footnote is in Times New Roman. So we're almost set. We have one last big step. That's to create the table of contents. Now that our document and its styles are looking pretty good, we can use our headings to form our table of contents. So go on up to the top of the document where we've made space for the table of contents, and you can make a table of contents by clicking on Insert and then Index and Tables. There's a second way to do it, and that's to click the References ribbon. And all the way on the left, you'll see there's this Table of Contents option. Choose Custom Table of Contents. I've chosen Formal here, and I'm selecting 4 levels. Now, it's important also to look at this feature here because it shows you that the headings map to Table of Contents levels. I've chosen 4 headings, and those headings are linked to the headings in the document. That's all you have to do, and boom, you have a table of contents. But looking at this, you might be quite disappointed. Frankly, quite ugly. There's several different fonts in this table of contents. There are different sizes. The spacing is bad. It's really kind of an aesthetic disaster. So to fix the ugly table, there's 2 ways you can go about it. You can do it manually. You can highlight the table and then do things like try to homogenize the font. You can also homogenize the font by choosing a size. But then to do other cleanings, you have to do hacky things like turning bold on and off a couple times, turning italics on and off a couple times. From there, you can see that the table of contents is still pretty ugly. There's all these different fonts. They still seem to be different sizes. The spacing is too big, so we could reduce the spacing a little bit. But it's still quite disappointing, and there's another problem here. If you change your headings, let's say you make a change to this first heading here, and then you update your table by right-clicking it and doing Update Field, you choose Update the entire table, you see all that ugly formatting came back. So the manual fix is not the right way to do this. You got to do it more programmatically. And the way to do it more programmatically is to modify the table of contents styles. They're over here on the right. And this is just like creating your heading styles. You got to go into each one of these, make them Times New Roman, fix the font size, decide whether or not they should be bold or not. I think you should reduce the spacing to 1.5 spaces. And then we could go in and check the font here. We can see that it's all caps, so that's good, at least. That actually fixes a good amount of our table of contents. That part now looks better. Some of the changes have propagated into the other headings, but the other headings are still really ugly. So let's modify these styles. We've got Times New Roman 12 point. They're bold. Let's make them 1.5 spaces. In font, we have small caps. Let's turn that off because that's improper for our brief. Then, in paragraph, there's a problem with the indentation here. The A in heading level 2 should line up with the A in 3 argument. And so what I'm doing here is I'm increasing the indentation to try to line that A up so it's right under argument properly, but I didn't quite get it all the way. So let's edit talk 2 again. We'll go into paragraph, and you'll see that this just requires some trial and error to get it right. I'm going to put it into 3/10 of an inch, and it's not quite there. Let's try it again. A lot of clicking. This is a little laborious, but when you get it right, it'll be great. So 4/10 of an inch is a little too much. So I'm beginning to see a pattern here. I think that our styles are going to be indented by half steps. So let's do 0.35, and we just have to type that in to get that value, and then boom, it lines up really nicely. Notice how the hanging indents are also nicely aligned. Now we have to fix Talk 3. I have no idea why Talk 3 is so ugly and why it is left aligned with no indentation at all. It doesn't make any sense. Let's get rid of the small caps. And then we need to go into paragraph and figure out how far to the right it should be aligned. So we're going to indent left here, and it should be at least half an inch, probably 0.6 of an inch. Then we have our hanging. That's good. Oh boy, it's not quite there. We still need to go in a fair amount. So Talk 3 again, and this again is the same styles, and I'm sorry it's so tedious, but this is what you got to do to get it right. And once you got it right, your document will be pretty beautiful and you won't have to think about it again. So let's do 0.75, and that, you see, lines up real nicely. So all we need to do now is fix the 4th level, and I can't explain why it's so ugly. I'll turn on the ruler here to help us line it up. So you see, if you go to View Ruler, we can get the ruler out and we can see that this 4th level needs to be about 1 1/8 inches in. So Talk 4, we modify. We got to fix this again. Who knows why it's Calibri? It should be Times New Roman, and it should be 12 point. The rest of that looks good under font. Let's look at paragraph, and we need to indent even more. It needs to be 1.1 or 1.2. I have no idea why the hanging doesn't show up either. So that's still not quite there. A little bit further over, and it will line up perfectly with the heading above it. So paragraph again, and then make that 1.2, and that's looking good. I see one other error here. The spacing in Talk 4, that's double spaced. Let's back that down to 1.5 spaces. And there we go. We have a pretty nice looking table of contents. And the payoff from editing those Talk styles is that when you change your headings now, and you go back up here and you update your table, your formatting will stay the same. If your practice requires you to do line numbers, it's very easy to insert them here. Here we have our brief template again. If you go to the Layout ribbon, you can click that, and then right here you can see the option Line Numbers. If you select this, it's important to look at the options pretty carefully. Line numbering options lets you decide what you're going to apply the numbers to. We want to be careful to select Apply to this section. If we select this, our line numbers will only show up in the text portions of our brief and not, for instance, on the cover page or the table of contents pages. Then from there, we can simply do Restart Each Page. This is going to insert our line numbers. You can see on this first page here we have 23 lines. If for some reason your court requires a different number of lines, or that's too many or too little, there's an easy fix. You go back to the Home ribbon and you adjust the underlying style for brief body text. We right-click on that, we say Modify, and then we can say, see here we have double spacing. Well, we could make this 1.5 spacing. If we press OK, this is going to change the whole body of the brief. And you'll see now we have 25 lines on this page. Maybe that's right for you, maybe that's not. But if we go through here, we'll see that our numbers stop. They don't appear on the last page where we have the signature, and they don't appear on the table of contents or the cover sheet. I hope my template here is perfect and that it does all the right things. But now you have the tools to fix anything you don't like. You can go into those styles and you can change spacing and other elements so that it looks good. Know that the local rules do specify some things about how a brief should appear, but the rules do give you some space for creativity. You can now change your styles to make the document really look good. Remember, now that you've created this document with proper headings, people can consume it using a screen reader. And I actually do this too. I have an application on my iPhone that reads documents to me. And it's one of the ways I do things on walks. I listen to documents, sometimes student assignments, sometimes law reviews. With proper headings, it works really nicely. And you can get away from your desk, you can get away from your chair, go for a walk, and listen to a document. Thanks for walking through this long and tedious module. But now that you've done it, you'll have a template that you can use, and it will let you focus on your writing rather than on your formatting. If you work on a law journal or a law review, I promise that this module will help you out. Imagine you get a submission from a professor and it's in terrible shape. The professor has used character formatting, the styles are inconsistent, the spacing is inconsistent, and so on. The document is ugly. How do you decompose and address this problem? Most lawyers and law students faced with this problem will manually go through the file line by line. It'll take you hours, and it qualifies as boring, repetitive stuff that your computer can do faster. So how do you do it faster? So here's a brilliant writing, but if we look at how it's formatted, we can see that the author has used paragraph formatting. They've used the tab button to move their headers around, and generally speaking, there's no structure in the document. So how do we deal with this? Well, one basic approach is to select all. You can do Control or Command A, and then use the command Clear All Formatting. That's this icon here in the home ribbon. That zaps all the formatting in the document. And at this point, you can just start over and go paragraph by paragraph. So that's one way of doing it. I'm going to undo that and go show you another way using Find and Replace. But to do that, I first want to show you a technique called reveal formatting. This lets you float your cursor over text, and then you can see what's going on with the formatting. We can see that the body text here is 13.5 points, and it's not bold or italics. And we can see that the footnotes are 10 point. This provides us information that we can use in a special strategy that's possible in Microsoft Word. So let's turn off reveal formatting. You do that by just pressing Escape. Go to Advanced Find and Replace. And what's really cool about this feature is that you can search for formatting. That is, any character, any word, any paragraph that has certain formatting. So here I'm going to select any text that is bold. So Microsoft Word will search through the document looking for that, and we're going to replace it with a style. Anything that's bold, we are going to replace with heading 1. So there we go, there's heading 1, we press OK, then we click on Replace All. Microsoft says it's made 5 replacements. So sure enough, now our level 1 headings are in H1. We can do the same with the level 2 headings that are italicized. But let's look at the body text. The body text here is 13.5 font. So if we go into Format Font, we can select regular font that is 13.5 points. And this is going to allow Word to rip through the document, find all non-bold, non-italic print, and replace it with normal. Once you've done this, now you can edit the whole document by just adjusting the normal style. Editing this document will just take minutes now instead of hours. I've showed you how to use Find and Replace to change styles, but you can also use Find and Replace to deal with all sorts of other noisome formatting issues. For instance, if you want 2 spaces after a period or 1 space, you can search for period space space or period space and replace it with the formatting you want. You can also bulk erase annoying formatting. For instance, the submitter who uses multiple paragraph marks. You can very easily use Find and Replace to select those paragraph marks and just erase them. So to recap, there are 2 strategies for cleaning up a document. One is to zap all the formatting and start from the beginning. Another is to use the bad formatting to create good formatting. And we do that by using Find and Replace and focusing in on styles and other formatting elements that we want to change. Microsoft Word creates some confidentiality issues. For instance, it injects your name into the documents you create and edit. It also includes statistics about your editing that might be strategically important for you to hide. This is how you address those problems. Sure enough, Microsoft is undermining that secrecy by putting my name in the document. You can change that by going into Preferences and going to User Information and changing the name here. I've put in Microsoft Office User. Why should you care? Well, consider this. Imagine that you are an inside counsel to some company. Anytime your name appears on a document, it inherently identifies your client. So that's something to think about. Now, the other problem with files is that Word puts statistics into them. So you can see this document I've just opened up. There's only one revision. It's only been edited for 3 minutes. Now, the problem here might be that if I've edited a document a lot of times, it might be a signal to an adversary that the document is really important to me. So a standard way of doing this is doing Control or Command A, selecting all the text, copying it with Command or Control C, starting a new document, and just pasting all the content in there. When you go in and check, you'll see that the statistics have been reset and there's 0 editing time and we only have 1 revision. It's critically important that you think about your tracked changes and comments when you share documents with others. I have seen lawyers include comments in their documents that indicate client secrets. For instance, how much a client is willing to pay for a transaction. It can be a disaster for you. So be sure that you track this carefully. There are some things you can do to reduce the risk. The comments are pretty subtle. They can be as subtle as this little gray box over here. So this document has a comment in it, but it might not be obvious at all. There's a couple ways you can see them. You can click on Show Comments, and that might change the document layout. You can also click on this Reviewing option in the Review ribbon, and this will show you all the insertions and so on, the track changes. When it comes to track changes, make sure when you're done with your final version, you do Accept all changes and stop tracking. That way, you will get rid of all that ink out there that might linger that you don't want others to see. Another mitigation is in security settings. You can get Word to warn you before saving or printing a file with comments in it. This is an area where the PC version of Microsoft Word actually does a better job. There is this option in the PC version that lets you clean the document. It inspects the document for personal information, comments, track changes, and so on, and it removes those from the document. In addition to the confidentiality risks, there's always integrity risks. Sometimes our computers crash. How do you deal with that in Microsoft Word? Well, I showed you earlier how you can turn autosave so that it saves your files every 2 minutes, but another redundancy you can use is a cloud service like Box.com. If you take these precautions, you should no longer be in the situation where your computer crashed and so your assignment is late. These are really simple things you can do and set up, and that way you shouldn't lose data. Like Google Documents, Microsoft Word will actually let you collaborate in real time on the cloud. You can do that by visiting the online version of Microsoft Word. It's fully featured, it works really nicely. But in addition, you might have situations where two different people are working on the same file at the same time, but they haven't coordinated. The cool thing is that in Microsoft Word has a feature called Compare Documents that lets you open up those different documents, spot the changes, merge them, and then deconflict the file. This is a great tool, should save you a ton of time when you work on a law journal or a law review. Of course, Word will let you save to PDF, create PDF files from your Word documents. You probably know how to do this. It's pretty straightforward. But you should know that information from Microsoft Word may travel into the PDF. For instance, your name, the name of your computer, and so on can end up in the PDF. You can find this under File Properties in your PDF program. Adobe Acrobat now has some features to spot embedded data and to remove it. You can find it in this Protect Document Tools tab. Really important thing to think about when the identity of your client or your identity as a lawyer might be sensitive and you don't want to reveal it in documents that you publish. Finally, this might seem too simple, but I've actually seen lawyers take PDFs and retype the text into Microsoft Word. Never do that. Microsoft will actually open a PDF now. So if there is text in a PDF, you can use Word to open up that PDF and extract the text. And of course, Acrobat, the full version, which you have access to as a student here, also does optical character recognition. So if you have a file that is image-based, Acrobat can tear through it and extract text from it. It does a pretty good job, and it's pretty fast. While you're here at Berkeley, you're likely to do empirical legal research, and you might even serve as a research assistant to a professor who does empirical legal studies. There's some very powerful insights you can gain on law by either doing qualitative or quantitative analysis. Qualitative analysis is analysis of things like interviews, text from speeches, and the like. Quantitative analysis involves numbers, countable things. Whichever you do, Microsoft Excel is actually a great tool for tracking your data and structuring it. If you do an empirical legal project, I recommend that you take a workshop at the D-Lab here on campus. They're free, and their boot camps and workshops can help you use Excel or more advanced statistical packages and get you running so that you learn how to use it, how to collect data correctly, how to clean it, and how to process it. We as lawyers tend to make reports. That is, we make memoranda, we make motions, we make final documents that include data. We very rarely do the opposite, the type of approach that's used in business intelligence, where one collects data and then uses those data to build reports. What would it mean to reorganize our thought about data so that when we collect information in the world, we are structuring it and cleaning it and maintaining it so that we can build reports rather than the opposite? If you work on an empirical legal project, let me share some advice. The first piece of advice is that you should keep data structured. That is, you should use a program like Excel or some other statistical program. Do not collect data in Microsoft Word. So what do I mean by structured? Unstructured data is what you find in a report. It's a big piece of paper or a PDF that has lots of different facts that are unorganized and have to be extracted here and there. Structured data is organized in columns and rows, and when data are structured, they are much easier to use. Here are some tips for collecting clean data. Here's a straightforward Excel worksheet that has bank transaction information in it. Notice that the column A has a unique identifier for each record, and the rows are the records. Those are our subject of study. The columns have attributes about those records. So the information goes across about a single record. Don't do it the opposite way. That's called transposition, and you don't want that. Notice also that the data are cleanly collected. There's only one piece of information in each cell, and to the extent it can be homogenized, it is. Now let me show you an error that most lawyers would make in editing this. Let's say this record holder is both a UK and US citizen. Most lawyers would do something like this. They would put a separate piece of data in that cell. That's the wrong thing to do. What you should do is create a new variable, a new column, and you can give it a descriptive name like holder of dual citizenship or the like. And in that first cell, you put in UK, you leave the other ones blank because we don't have information about the other ones. One of the most important techniques is to collect binary data rather than other forms of data. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let's return to this Excel data set again. I've labeled some of the columns on whether they're continuous variables. For instance, this column here of numbers represents a continuous variable of dollar amounts, since dollars can be divided in many ways. Discrete variables, these are whole numbers. They represent the total number of transactions each customer has done. And then finally, categorical variables. These are categories, classes. And you'll see that we have retail and other and so on. And they're very clean, and there's a limited number of them. But the best data to create in order to ultimately generate reports that will be useful for you is binary data. So you noted how earlier I made this column to show dual citizenship. An even better approach would be to create a variable that was labeled something like is dual citizen. And instead of putting UK in there, we would put the number 1. I need to fix the formatting here. The number 1 will represent true. We know that that user is a dual citizen. We'll use the number 0 for false, and blank or no data means that we just don't know. We don't have any observations about the remaining people in this data set. Let me show another example. Suppose this was a data set of your clients. And suppose you're a real estate lawyer. Most lawyers would collect data about their clients by doing something like this. They would create a column and they would say, they would label it, let's say, services. And then if they're a real estate lawyer, they might have land transactions, wills, and trusts. And they could, type in these words for each record. This is not how to do it, but this is how most people would do it. Instead, what you should do is you should create a column for each service you provide. One for will, one for trusts, one for land. And then give these columns a 1 if you perform that service, or leave it blank or a 0 if you have not. Now, why should you do it this way? If you organize the data this way, the data can be used to generate reports that are actually useful. For instance, what services have you delivered to what customers? And that should help you decide how to communicate with your clients in the future. And here's a frustrating reality about empirical legal research. Cleaning the data takes maybe half of your time. But if you clean data, if you collect it in clean ways and maintain it nicely, you can develop insights from that data that are quite powerful. There are a number of reasons to rethink data. One is client development. Imagine you wrote a will for a client 5 years ago. Wouldn't it be nice to know that so you could follow up and ask if things have changed? Imagine if you represented different people in criminal proceedings and there's been an important decision from the California Supreme Court. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to quickly find those clients, reach out to them, and explain why developments in their case give them new opportunities? In addition to client development, there are basic case development approaches you can make. Imagine if you're doing the same case over and over, and you eventually decide that you want to do a mass action, a class action. Wouldn't it be nice if you could look over all your clients and the people you've interviewed and find the best ones to be the representative plaintiff? Conversely, if you're on the defense side, Having data well structured helps you look at a plaintiff class and determine ways to break up the class, how to break its commonality, or other elements of the class claim. Finally, having structured data about your clients and about your practice will help you engage in business development. You'll be able to see what clients come back to you with and what they're likely to need. If you write a will in year 0, what are they likely to need in year 3 and year 5, and so on? And deepen your relationships and have clients be repeat customers. To recap, you can up your game as a law student, as a research assistant, or as a lawyer by thinking strategically about data. What does that mean? Stop thinking about reports. Think about the underlying information you collect as a lawyer and how it can be collected cleanly and in a structured fashion so that you can generate reports. We've covered a lot of ground. The most important points relate to using Microsoft Word styles. They'll help you make more well-organized and even pretty documents to submit for your assignments. When I was in law school, it was the twilight of the legal secretary. Back then, law firm associates and partners could rely on that legal secretary to do this work. But nowadays, law firms are running more lean, and they want you to know more about how to use a computer so that you can effectively do your job. Legal practice is going to continue to change. Some of the bread and butter we do as lawyers, things like document review, is likely to be supplemented and maybe replaced by computers. It's important to stay on top of technology so that as those changes occur, you can be more resilient. You can adapt and adopt those practices. Technology can be threatening, and I don't mean to be a Pollyanna about it. It is threatening. But for us, we have a huge advantage. For you, a lawyer, a professional, you're paid for your critical thought. And guess what? Computers cannot engage in critical thinking. They can do boring tasks quickly, but they can't do the work that you're paid for. Keep that in mind. Computers will come along and make us faster and more efficient, but they are unlikely to replace us. But to avoid the erosion of our practice, you will have to pay attention to developments in legal technology. If you think of yourself as not a tech person, I really encourage you to reframe how you think about that. In a different course that I teach called Computer Programming for Lawyers, I take students with zero programming experience and show them how to program in the Python language. It works. And I'm always surprised by how many people show up in that course saying that they're not really technology people, and they leave saying that they fundamentally have changed how they think about computers and how they'll use computers in legal practice. To be explicit about the payoff, let me show you this organization called Mass Access. They've created a website that has special software that helps people fill out court forms. Of course, there are legal and ethical issues with creating a service like this, but you can see in a broad sense how access to justice could be dramatically reformed by more facility with computers and with more facility of lawyers to use their computer to do tedious things like fill out forms to get the justice our clients deserve. Thanks so much for your hard work and attention to this material.